Amazing. All right. So following that, wow, amazing keynote. Gives me great joy to introduce Niki from the Future Society, who will be moderating a panel on Align AI with Human Values. So give it up to Niki.
Hi, everyone. That is a tough session to follow. Should I ask the rest of the panelists to join me so we can just get right into it after I give some introductory remarks? Are they on?
They are now.
Okay, great.
There we go.
Hello.
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 Hi. Nice to
How
meet
are
you.
you?
I'm doing great.
Great,
It's been a good Thursday.
Hi, guys.
We hear you.
And hello, I'm, as I said before, really, really happy to be here. I have been in this responsible AI space, or just more specifically, the AI policy world, for some time now, for about 7 years. And let me say that since the moment ChatGPT was released in the world, the landscape has transformed completely. I was thinking earlier today about this panel and what we're going to talk about. You know, our topic around AI governance and the AI race, and ultimately how do we align AI systems with our human values is quite broad. So I was thinking, where do we focus? And I was thinking about what has happened in the past couple of months, and I don't know where to focus because it's so much. It seems every day there's something new happening, and perhaps I can just share some high-level 3 observations that we can use then after to, you know, unpack and have an actual conversation. So the first trend or observation that we're seeing in the landscape has to do with just the speed of technological advancements. So as X was just saying, AI isn't a new thing. AI has existed for decades now. But until recently, AI systems, or the ones that, you know, most citizens interacted with on an everyday, they had narrow uses. I think what ChatGPT and other models such as Claude or Llama-based models, why they transformed the playing field is now all of a sudden people realize that what these AI systems are capable of, and that there's general usability for them, things that are intended and things that are misintended. So the speed of technological advancement makes me and others question to what extent our society has time to process these changes, process what's happening, and also to what extent do we have time to come up with new rules, new safeguards, new norms to make sure that the risks are mitigated. So that, I would say, is the first trend. The second one is just the AI race that a lot of people keep talking about, just racial dynamics. In the last couple of months, we've seen so many interesting partnerships and mergers between big tech players, most of them based in California, right? Obviously between OpenAI and Microsoft, between Google, and now officially the merger with DeepMind, or Google and Anthropic. And people are really questioning, you know, the people developing the systems have a lot of power. And are we okay with such a small concentration of people holding on to this power? Are we okay to leave that to them? And beyond an industry level, it's also happening on a geopolitical level. So between countries, all of a sudden AI in DC is being framed as a national security issue, and not just in DC, also across the, you know, across the Atlantic in Europe and in Asia, all over the world. People are wondering who's going to develop this system first, who's going to become the new economic superpower. And given these 2 observations, the third thing that has happened is I'm in the policy space. AI has been in policy dialogues for a while now. But all of a sudden, it's the thing, right? It's climbed up the agenda. It's no, I think, simple thing that we should take lightly, that the President of the United States is talking about existential risks that might be caused from AI, or there's meetings between the G7 leaders talking about these issues, right? To me, all these observations just highlight how urgent the topic is and how important it is that we're having conversations like what we're doing today to really unpack it and figure out collectively a way forward. So I think that was enough of my introductory remarks. I want to hear from these awesome people. Let me give quick introductions and then we can get right into it, and I make sure we have time for questions as well. So to my left, I have Ramsay. Ramsay is the CEO of Mission Control. Mission Control is a public benefit corporation that offers enterprise solutions and services for AI safety. And I'm sure you can tell us much more about that in a second. And Savannah. Savannah is the director of product and user experience for AI for IDEO, a global graphic company. And last but not least, we have Michael. Michael runs a really awesome organization, which I want to learn more about. It's EZTV Online Museum. So it's basically an artist-run organization that has, I think, more than 1,700 artworks I saw online. Oh, yeah. So great. Let's jump on it with you, Ramsay. Maybe you can help me set the scene. So my understanding from Mission Control is you work with organizations to figure out how generative AI can be deployed in a trustworthy and a safe manner. So ultimately, that requires AI alignment. You want to make sure AI is deployed in adherence with all of our shared values. Can you maybe help us understand what that alignment problem is and what is of concern right now for you?
Yeah, and there's two ways we're going to talk about alignment. There's alignment as the Fortune 500 cares about it, and there's alignment the way that people who talk about existential risk or extinction level events use the word alignment. If you're Coca-Cola or MasterCard or BMW and you've looked at ChatGPT, you're seeing capabilities that you're very excited about, but fundamentally unable to use for three reasons. You're missing the cookbook of how your knowledge workers, and not just your data scientists, but everybody else who's using a laptop for a living, that missing cookbook of the specific recipes that these people are going to use generative AI systems to do the specific jobs to be done inside their job. You're missing a test kitchen playground for them to use generative AI in safe sandboxes without leaking data or hurting people to the harms that X pointed to, all of those very real, continually perpetuated. So you're missing the cookbook, you're missing a test kitchen, and you're missing the smoke detectors. You're missing systems that can prevent data loss to external third-party models, because if you're a major bank or you are a pharmaceutical company and someone's copying and pasting health records into ChatGPT, these are pretty serious data loss, pretty serious, what really fundamentally amount to crimes being committed on accident by people just trying to do their job. So Mission Control as a platform is the solution for very large organizations to be able to get to play safely and unlock this value. For them, alignment is about that. Can I line up my jobs to be done, the safe way I need to be able to do them, and automated governance and compliance with the laws that are emerging to make sure we can actually get value here. When people at Oxford, or where I am a senior research associate at Cambridge, like to think about the capital A alignment problem, that is fundamentally, can we do anything to ensure or prove that a sufficiently intelligent non-human system, or whatever way, shape, or form that is, wants what we want in the ways we want it, such that when we give it a fundamental instruction like, help me accomplish this task, it knows to say things to itself like, okay, in the process of accomplishing this task and the many steps I might go do, preventing myself from being turned off is off limits. Preventing a human from interfering with my ability to get the job done because I'm doing it wrong is off limits. And it's these subtle things, like when I drove here and I thought I want to get there in time, I did not go so fast and drive so recklessly as to endanger myself or the people around me. I have a good learned cultural intuition for that. It's anywhere between unknowably hard to potentially impossible to, with 100% certainty, guarantee we can do the same for a non-human intelligence system. That problem is what lives inside every claim about existential risk. Everyone in this room here grew up in society and has a fundamental cultural construct for what we mean with all the quiet stuff we don't have to say when we communicate. And since these machines, as X very well pointed out, are learning by building statistical representations of the way the world works according to our text, there's always going to be little odds, ends, and subtleties that we're not going to be able to adequately capture well enough such that we can guarantee that what they want and how they get it lines up with what we want and how we want them to get it. And that's what we mean when we say the capital A alignment problem. Very different from what companies care about, but if we get it wrong, there's a non-trivial chance it kills everyone.
Just to follow up from that, do you think there's a shift where that second definition of the alignment problem is starting to trickle into the private sector and industry world?
It really is, because now you have labs that have opened up. Like Anthropic is built around this idea that we can take very seriously as a private company, that the alignment problem is not a conceptual sci-fi kind of conversation. It's very real, especially if we, on our current trajectory, keep handing over as much decision-making and control, inference, classification, and prediction to machines as we are today. If we change nothing about our trajectory, the alignment problem becomes non-hypothetical in months, not years. And private organizations, militaries, and government are very quickly waking up to the idea that this is a real concern that we need to immediately have not just plans for in place, but treaties around, international accords around, center of excellence built upon. And for companies who are looking at this and saying, when I start incorporating more and more AI into my business operations, I need to have that certain sense of certainty that this is not going to go catastrophically off the rails for me. And caring about that problem doesn't detract from the intrinsic value of caring about things like algorithmic justice, fairness, racial, sexual, or ability level equity. Both of these things are simultaneously two of the biggest problems we have in front of us. And there's a lot of people who don't agree with that perspective. There's a lot of people who say, you either care about one or the other, but not both. And I think right now governments are waking up to the idea that now's the time we have to care about both today.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think there's space for both, and we should be thinking about both. And maybe we can build on that with Savannah a little bit. I think it's true that when a lot of people think about the risks of AI alignment, they're referring to more maybe long-term risks that now are not so long-term, or societal scale harms like an existential threat to humanity. Savannah, maybe from your experience in the AI space, what do you think are the most immediate risks that you're seeing right now, and have experience like treating them as well?
Yeah. I think that the biggest risk is people not taking responsibility for what they are creating. So it's not that it's these ambiguous secondary effects of, like, eventually this thing is going to happen, or, like, on paper, XYZ, bias, disinformation, et cetera, might happen. It's that we, as the people who are creating these systems, are not fully aligning ourselves with our values and understanding the implications of what it is that we are creating. And a lot of the time, what we're seeing with all of these like large-scale, late-term issues that are definitely problematic. We don't want something that's going to destroy the world. But what we're seeing is people are pushing out the responsibility for actions and decisions that are being made right now. And as we are building these systems, we need to take a step back, take a breath, consider what it is that we're creating, what the possible risks are, and how we might approach this differently. And that's why I think that in this moment, it's interesting that we're getting to a place of, more and more heavy technology being integrated into our daily lives. And it makes it more and more of a human moment. And that's not to say that we should shun all technology, but it's saying that humans need to be involved in the process of creating technology. As X was talking about earlier, it's about context, How are we paying attention to the setting that the technology that we're creating is going to live in? How are we taking a step back and being really careful about the rollout that we're doing? How are we designing with people? A lot of the work that I've been doing over the last decade or so is really thinking about how to integrate technologies into people's lives in the ways that are actually healthy for them and healthy for community, healthy and across the relational spectrum, of how you are relating to yourself, how you're relating to others, and how you're relating to a more global community. And so if we're not paying attention to the dynamics that we are bringing technology into, we're not understanding the repercussions of what we're doing, then we're breaking a lot of that social fabric, which is, I think, what we've seen definitely US and a lot across the world over the last couple of years, if not decade or so. So in general, I think that it's really up to us to take that step back and to understand, what it is that we're doing, what we can be doing differently, and to, use the methodologies, use the approaches that allow us to do that, and to, listen to voices who have been talking for a long time about, what the potential repercussions are in different spaces, and to not pretend like we're in this brand new moment where everything is brand new and we need to figure it out, but to really listen to leaders who have been doing this work for a long time, and researchers and ethicists and, people that have studied wealth inequality and all of these other major issues that we know are coming. So TLDR, take a step back.
And the natural follow-up question from that is what voices, right? And I'm interested, Michael, to hear from you. What's the role maybe artists and the creative industry in general can play in making sure that systems are aligned with human values? Have you thought about any ways they can intervene?
Yeah, thank you. Art certainly can. Art can certainly have an impact, but just like AI, art is just a set of tools in individuals' hands. Individuals that are just as empowered with their beliefs and their biases. Just like every other tool human beings have made, art can only do so much. Collectively, there needs to be more dialogue. Art can be a translator. Art can be a communicator, but it is intrinsically as imperfect as anything else that has ever been created. And so what we should do is not necessarily put such baggage onto things, but understand that this is an improv. This is a dance that has not been fully choreographed. This is a musical piece that is more jazz than Beethoven. This is something we are working on together, second by second, and if we hit a bad note, hopefully we can slur it back into key. If we go a little bit off beat, hopefully we can syncopate it and put it back on the backbeat, but it won't always happen. There will be mistakes. Look how art has treated AI since before the term was even made. Now, 2,300 years ago, a guy in Greece called Aristotle wrote a piece called Poetics, in which he was going to explain to the universe what art is. And what he basically said is that good stories need conflict. That, oh, today was really nice. Oh, I just had a nice lunch. Oh, isn't the dog nice? Isn't going to sell many tickets at Mann's Chinese Theater. What does sell tickets is conflict, drama, uncertainty, fear. So how has AI been taught? Scientists are mad people. They're insane. They have all kinds of character flaws. They're out to do something terrible, and robots are going to kill you. I don't doubt that as there are robots among us, I don't doubt that some will kill us, but it may not be intentional. Things glitch. Cars kill us. Lathes kill us. Drill presses kill us. Things happen. But if we're going to think that art is going to save us, we're going to have to save ourselves. We are going to have to talk to each other. We are going to have to get out of our silos. And artists like me have to talk to computer scientists, not once a year at a conference, but every time we try to do something. And any science project that doesn't have an artist in a lead position isn't much of a science project, and any art project that doesn't have a scientist in some sort of lead position isn't much of an art piece in the 21st century. So, do I think art can be part of this conversation? It always has been. Has it fixed anything? All it can do is raise questions. And it's up to everybody, after they walk out of the movie theater or get out of their couch after the Netflix flick, or looked at their phone and watched 2 hours of TikTok videos, they need to talk to a living human being. So AI is here. We know it. As X so profoundly said, it is good and bad because it is a reflection of us. It is a mirror, an imperfect mirror that may get better, but will probably never be perfect, just like we will never be perfect. That's what I think.
And we can end it there. Yeah, I agree with everything. Everyone keeps on saying it's gonna take a village, and that's 100% right. We need every single person to get involved in these dialogues and we're paving the way this will play out right now. The dance that hasn't been choreographed, we're choreographing it right now. So X was saying, get involved in your local dialogues, your state dialogues, your federal dialogues. Please do. That's I think how we can get it close to perfect. Not perfect, but closer to there. Okay, let's see. We've been talking a lot about risks, I guess, in the first part of the panel. Maybe, I also don't want to undermine the benefits that can come out of these AI systems. Those are several. And a lot of people, one of the concerns or one of the arguments that people make, especially, again, in DC, in this policy dialogues, is that if we start governing or if we start regulating AI, then we will stifle innovation. So I was wondering, Savannah, from you, how do you think we can get that right balance where we can still have responsible innovation, but also be protected from the risks?
Yeah. I think that it is and always will be that we are designing and working together, that we are not sitting inside of our silos of technologists and makers and people that are in the trenches of building these technologies, but that we are having open dialogues about the very real and very realistic repercussions of the choices that we're making on a day-to-day basis. And so if we think of innovation as not an activity that happens kind of in pockets and then the world bursts and we receive TikTok or whatever the thing is, it's a process that happens through the collective decisions that we are making and the cultural trends that are happening over time. And so if we can use our social consciousness and the social awareness that I think has really broken open, especially in the last couple of years since the racial justice uprisings in 2020 and all of the work that's been done for decades and decades before that, if we can use those foundations as part of the driving force of how we are shaping these technologies and how we are building them, if that is part of the conversation, rather than a secondary part of something that you bring in as a maybe final touch. If we're really building things from a place of values and consensus around what really matters and what we want to be perpetuating in the world, then our technology is so much better. And that means that the way that we build technology and the way that we design technology should not just be to the technologists. To your point, we should have artists in the room, we should have makers in the room, and the multidisciplinary approach of just having dialogues about, how does this technology actually work, and what is our concern about it, and then, what is the context that is sitting inside of, and how the world works, and how do we want to shape it based off of all of those inputs. And then realizing the actual impacts on human beings and continuing to shape it and throwing things away when they should be thrown away and pulling people in when they should be brought in. But really, if we're the ones in the room, then we need to be constantly asking who's missing from this room and who else should be here and who else should be making decisions with us and who are we making decisions for. And if we're not asking those questions, then we are making choices for other people, and that just has fundamental problems at the core.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of these issues will be solved by just dialogues and society by itself, or maybe the markets by themselves figuring it out, perhaps through voluntary mechanisms. At the same time, it does seem for some really extreme risks or some things that are likely to happen in the short term, we also need something binding with teeth. So that's where, I guess, hard law and regulation comes in. Michael, have you thought about what type of regulation, if any, is needed for AI right now? What that regulation could look like?
Yeah, I've looked at the White House's proposed AI Bill of Rights, and there are things in it that intrigue me. X had talked about the intrinsic algorithmic biases in lending and housing and employment. I think that's something we can address, but one of the problems I fear is the jurisdictional one, is that the last time I checked, the internet is spread all over the planet. And the last time I checked, a lot of the servers that feed us questionable material are outside the borders of the United States of America. So what are the legal restraints that can be imposed on a technology that is intrinsically non-location based? How can we build protections, firewalls, regulations that may be listened to between Montana and Texas, or Maryland and Oregon, but if the materials we are accessing are coming from another country, including, dare I say, a country whose does not feel our longevity is in their best interest strategically, how do we regulate that? How do we regulate on a global scale when in fact we only have jurisdiction within our boundaries? And I know there is a belief that we can somehow use the world courts. Many countries don't recognize the world, the Hague. There are many countries that already have microeconomies based on malware, based on phishing, based on all of the pre-Web 3.0 hacking techniques. One thing that I feel is under-discussed in the AI community is cybersecurity. AI is just as hackable as your email. The truth is that even blockchain, despite all of the hype, is hackable. That there may be far fewer hackers out there that have the skill sets, but you only need a few to do serious damage. So when we talk about regulation, I think we have to balance that with regulation and security. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times things are going to go bad. But I am all for any protection for how many people, few as that may be, that it can help.
Yeah, I think any end state that I can visualize in my head will need some type of coordination that crosses jurisdictions. There's no way we can get this, and I know it's hard to think about, but we've done it before. We did it for nuclear proliferation. I guess, as I was talking earlier, right, I was talking about how quick things are moving. The question there is, will we do it in time? Will we be able to build such international coordination mechanisms before something quite bad happens? And on that, Ramsay, a lot of people have been talking about slowing down AI development and deployment. So maybe we can end this part of the panel there, and then we can open to Q&A with your thoughts on whether slowing down is a good idea. That's part of it. And then, of course, you can touch on if it's even feasible, right?
So I didn't sign the 6-month pause letter, and I publicly ridiculed the 6-month pause letter as a laundry list of people who have a poor grasp on game theory. which is my very, very sardonic tape because these are extremely intelligent people, but narrowly because we're forced to remember that from the advent of the first nuclear tests to the development and enforcement of the International Atomic Energy Agency took about 20 years. Atom bombs are unambiguously dangerous. It is very easy to detect when atom bombs are being built. They require huge facilities. They require getting your hands on exotic materials. They take a handful of scientists for which we know the roster of everyone on Earth who's qualified to build them, and those names are all in databases and always have been. If you try to propose that even if you could track the training of really large foundation models to data centers, that you could distinguish that behavior from any other ways we use data centers, that's a non-starter. If you believe that we could do so when we're still having very openly contested debates about whether or not AI risk is fill in the blank, practical, actually a real thing, sci-fi, just a leftist grift by the woke liberal elite. Like, pick your thing here that's a bullshit reason why this whole field isn't real. And these are still actively debated things. You have the world's richest dude simultaneously saying he's gonna make based AI so he can combat the OpenAI left coast mind virus that this thing has, and then turn around and say, oh no, but AI is totally gonna kill all of us. Our discourse is all over the place on whether or not this is a real problem at all. And atomic bombs are unambiguously deadly. If the thing that's unambiguously deadly was that hard to get an international coordinating agency on the hook for, my belief that we can do so for this thing that we can't even agree about, what it's made of, what to call it, whether or not it's a problem, and how to detect it, is it's basically a non-starter. And if you believe that you can get a bunch of profit-driven private sector organizations to collectively agree to disarm the dead sprint to be the dominant economic factor on Earth in the most important time in human history, for which the opportunity cost of one day of time is higher than it's ever been and rising, I've got some ice to sell you up in Alaska. This is just not gonna happen. Like, that's why I said this roster, this 6-month pause letter is just a name of well-intentioned people who are engaging in a series of very, very optimistic and otherwise poorly guided rationale around what are the incentive mechanisms at play here. And that's where I always go back, is in the system that has brought us more global prosperity in the past 100 years through the industrial and post-industrial economies and revolutions, and now into the fourth industrial revolution, the median person on Earth lives a substantially better life than they ever have, with better access to information, matter, energy, capital, and the ability to transform their life by their own accords in a space of peace and justice. And we've got a litany of things we still have to get right. We are by no means in the good place, capital G, capital L, trademark, but we're getting there pretty well on the back of a system that funnels flows of capital, energy, information, and matter to the places that they do the most good. The market's worked out really good ways to accomplish things, but it comes with a series of double-edged swords, and this is one of them. You can't get private sector organizations who are in a dead sprint to be the winner of this thing to stop, because the chips on the table look like the first one to get to AGI and get to AGI in an asymmetric kind of way has the ability to turn around and automate most knowledge work. The studies coming out of Stanford right now, led by Eric Brynjolfsson, which dovetail with what my organization's found in our labor transformation playbook, is that in the next few years, 6 out of 10 knowledge workers are going to be permanently out of work. The plate word is seeking retraining. Seeking retraining is a euphemism for you don't have a job. That is not by 2045, that's by like 2027. Raise your hand in this room if you're a knowledge worker. If you kind of just use a laptop for a living. If you like wake up and have a meeting some point today that said like, no updates from me, you're a knowledge worker. 6 out of 10 of us. I'm a CEO. I'm in that 6 of 10. When we look at these things and the games that we have set up to play, we're reminded that capital markets only retain human characteristics as a symptom of technical underdevelopment. And as we increasingly find ways to funnel Saudi and Norwegian sovereign wealth fund money into private equity, into venture capital, into server farms and startups, the market is synthesizing its own means of directing its own flows. When this happens, which we are living through right now, this takeoff phase of this process, you'd have an easier time dismantling JP Morgan Chase than you would stopping Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI from a dead race. You'd have to basically dismantle the whole set of incentives to get this thing to stop because, oh man, does capital like automation? Oh fuck, it likes it so much better than it likes people. And you live in that thing. You live there. And maybe there's other universes where we didn't live there, but we live in this one. There was no Manhattan Project for AI, and Sam Altman said it on Capitol Hill recently. You guys were supposed to do this. You left it to the market to do it, and now you gotta deal with it.
Well, the likelihood of getting the AI labs to pause, I agree, is 0. But at the same time, the pause letter has stressed the urgency. When you have all these AI academics, these scientists, researchers, basically telling you about the harms and the existential threats, people, again, in DC, people in Congress have no choice but to listen. So that's one good thing. It opened policy windows.
And it did. So what did I sign instead? 2 weeks ago, there was the open letter from the Center for AI Safety calling for a 22-word description, 22-word statement, something to the tune of existential level risk posed by our current trajectory of AI should be a global priority at the scale of climate catastrophe and nuclear annihilation. Full statement. It's not calling for a pause. It's not a gross misunderstanding of late capitalism. It's not a gross misunderstanding of incentive structures. It's simply, we need to talk about this like adults in the room, or this is going to go off the fucking cliff.
Okay, let's open it up to you guys. Does anyone have any questions? There's one here.
Just yell.
What about open source AI, right? Because an argument is, there's 2 arguments, that open source can provide a counterbalance to the large institutional models, the closed models. On the other hand, as these open AI models get open sourced, you end up with something like Wizard Vicuna 30B uncensored. And so the argument is it better to have things out in the open that are uncensored so people can figure out what's wrong with it and make adjustments, or are those dangerous? Like, where do you kind of draw the balance?
As someone who booted Vicuna 13B uncensored yesterday on his MacBook for the first time, which felt awesome because these things are so hard to actually get to run. This is the argument of the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with 10 guns. No, it's not. No. The open source problem, the fact that models flow through the pathway of a research lab, build something new with new capabilities. They do 2 orders of magnitude on how large that model is, and it has improvements in capabilities. They find ways to change the architecture, or the architecture exfiltrates and now it's open source, and then they shrink it without losing capacity. It means that you can run language models that were the state of the art 2 years ago on your iPhone now. And that innovate, scale, democratize, optimize loop is what we operate in. And it is the thing that keeps me up at night because it is analogous to, we've figured out how everyone can make like ricin in their bathtub. And if we think that the threats posed to civil society, the labor market, or civilization itself are great for single large monolith models, they are different but exacerbated for millions or billions of unregistered smaller models that will become as capable as large models are faster than we should expect. So that actually is one that keeps me really up at night. Yeah, and I'm one of those kids who read Kurzweil at 15, and then my life went burp, and did this for the rest of it. This is one of the things that Ray's proposed of if the 20th century was defined by atomic, biological, and chemical dangers at an existential level, the 21st century is going to be defined by nanotechnological, genetic, and robotic, of which AI falls into robotic. And the part that he pointed to in 2012 was that, no, 2007, was that the difference between the 20th century and the 21st century was not just that the scale of risk is orders of magnitude larger, it's that the ease of use is substantially better. It'd be very hard for me to go get my hands on the amount of equipment it would take to meaningfully develop a biochemical weapon right now. It would be trivial for me to get my hands on a language model that I could boot on my laptop and start creating disinformation campaigns leading into an election. It would be a matter of minutes. And when that becomes table stakes, the dynamics around risk change dramatically. So the thing you're pointing to of people just push and go on stuff, yeah. And this is a 15-year conversation that gets us here for how we're talking about it now.
And that's precisely the reason why on a certain level, and I kind of shun the word existential, I think it's an overused term, but the fact that a laptop can cause serious damage, whereas you would need a kind of small factory infrastructure to do other kinds of equivalent damage, is why the concerns are not overrated. I think it's going to be good and bad, but to downplay the bad is at our own peril, precisely because a $1,000 device you can buy in Target can be among the most serious weapons on the planet.
Next question.
Just yell, we can hear.
When the EU sets data privacy standards, and the US kind of goes, oh, that's cute. And when they set interface standards for cell phones, and Apple goes, oh, that's kind of cute. Where do you see AI, where will the Hague of AI be as far as a planetary body that will be listened to?
There have been calls for creation of that planetary body, and I think that what's currently happening is that there are people who are working on these technologies, like in OpenAI and in all of the other, big companies that are building them. And at the end of the day, I think who's actually kind of writing our legislation and paving our future are people that work in those businesses. And that's really problematic because, as you spoke to, the incentives that are behind what they are saying are going to be more aligned with the value systems that those businesses hold, which are fundamentally tied to their business models. And so there does need to be a set of standards around how we interact with this stuff and how we implement it. And if capitalism is the strongest force in the universe, then the ways that people decide to use these technologies are not always going to be aligned with those standards. And so there is not a clear answer in this moment of how to get things right. There are a lot of questions that a lot of people are asking. There's a lot of research about what we could do so that we can explore what can go right. And I think that those of us who are building in this space need to understand the drivers of the world that we live in and what we've seen, and actually be designing around those things and folding those things into what we are creating. So international bodies, yes, but I think it's more up to us.
Okay. Well, I wanted to follow up a little bit on what you just mentioned about creating standards for what exactly is considered to be morally and ethically acceptable with AI. And one thing I haven't heard been addressed yet is the popularity of making deep fakes, right? This type of technology used to be exclusive, really, and now it's becoming a lot less exclusive. And the amount of people that have their hands access to this type of I guess I'm not sure if I'm coming through the microphone okay, but anyway, the point I'm trying to raise is the moral and ethical concern about deep fakes. And when is it considered acceptable to use this technology and when is it not? Because, like I mentioned, more and more people are getting their hands on this, and maybe this conversation should be addressed sooner than later. When is it okay and not okay to make deep fakes, So I wanted to give you, to respond to that.
To non-answer your question and non-answer the question prior. Yeah, right. If you, we go back to Marshall McLuhan and this idea that the reason that regulation is almost always out of date by the time it's written is because the process by which we have to make it is like trying to drive our car backwards, steering only looking at the rearview mirror. Regulation by definition can only, for public sector bodies, I think it was laws, can only work when it has precedent against which to set. It almost never can effectively talk about things that could maybe happen very shortly. And when we think about most things that are pressing, like when and how should there be some sort of set of standards around deepfakes, we're not going to get the law before we get the problem manifest as an actual crisis. And it's only when we're on the other side of crisis that we have the context frame through which regulators can meaningfully say, we can't let that happen again, because as foresightful as it would be to bring a bunch of futurists, planners, fiction writers, and super forecasters into a room and say, can you make a law that will stop the first bad thing from happening? That isn't how law gets made.
Can I?
There isn't something right now, but
Yeah.
this, I think, will likely come up. I actually think this is one of the immediate risks that people are talking about, and it's likely that in the next elections in the US, we're gonna see how deepfakes can be used to spread misinformation, disinformation, and some kind of scandal, like usually policy is reactive to things, so some kind of big scandal, I think, will lead to something like it.
And there's
I
a
also
ripe
just wanted to
opportunity
point-
for a company to create a validation system. Now, you know how like on political commercials at the end it says, I'm Joe Schmo and I approve this message? Well, there's a kernel of an idea in that. So at the moment I'm learning how to make deepfakes because I want to know how to do it. And I also don't want to live in a world where creativity is censored or hammered. There are all kinds of fictionalized movies about historical figures, having them do things that never happened. They're fakes. They're early versions of deep fakes. We know they're fake. We know Einstein didn't date Marilyn Monroe, or maybe he did, but we suspect he didn't. But I don't believe there should be a law saying you can't make a movie in which Albert Einstein dates Marilyn Monroe. And I don't believe we should live in a society where we say you can't make a work, a creative work, in which you put something together and have them do things that never happened. But it's up to us as critical thinkers to know what is fake, to know that a certain politician is probably not eating children. But I don't think we should live in a world where someone can't make a piece where that person did. And is that a gray area that's complex? Yes. Challenging art has always caused problems and raised ideas. I think we're going to have to figure out how to tell whether original source material was manipulated. I believe engineers can do that. I don't know how to do that, but I believe there are possibly people in this room who do know how to do that. And that's going to be a very lucrative industry for whoever figures that out effectively.
I don't have as much trust in people to make choices as maybe you do.
I don't.
If like oversimplified, if you need something in your mind, have you asked for consent? Is the baseline question. If you're going to make something that has somebody else's likeness in it, have you asked for consent?
I mean, obviously, criminal acts are criminal acts. And some things are clear. But the reasons we have courts, supposedly, and we all know courts are as imperfect as AI or art or us, because they are of us. But the idea is to have that day in court and have that discussion and see if it crossed the line.
So I think,
next,
because we have a break coming up, so maybe we can
One
just...
more question.
One more.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. We haven't even touched on autonomous weapons. And what is the incentive? We're asking governments to regulate these private companies, but how do we ask them to regulate themselves when there's no incentive, and talk about a game theory problem there? So what are your thoughts on that? Like what is that going to look like in the next 5, not even 5 maybe, it's here now.
I'll give you the quick answer because we do need to go to break. The US is one of the only countries that refuses to sign the ban on lethal autonomous weapon systems. Because the thing you pointed to of, will we be the first to use them? No. But when we use them, it will be with overwhelming asymmetrical force. And that's the closest approximation of the stance that we have civilian knowledge of. But we are wildly missing from some of the discourse around banning these things. We just don't have that conversation.
Okay, I think we can wrap it there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.